Hello and welcome back to part two of our lecture that started on the evening of 9/11. We covered an awful lot of material in the chapter on network security, but there's still a little more we need to talk about. But we got through a lot of the important stuff. Certainly the main idea out of chapter 3 is this security life cycle that we started talking about. And we spent, if you just look at the number of slides we spent on understanding the threat environment, clearly that's the most time-consuming process, is to understand the threat environment. And then we spend an awful lot of time on planning. But once you're done planning and figuring out how you're going to address the most likely threats in your environment, then you're ready to set up some kind of protection plan based on policies, procedures, people, and probably lastly technology. The technology is really the easy part. So the protection sections is pretty short. And then finally we're going to wrap up with the response section, which is even shorter. So we got about halfway through protection, and I'm going to skip ahead here to where we left off. So we were talking about one form of protection is to require authentication, which is the most basic level of protection, requiring every user on the network to identify and validate who they are, that they are who they say they are. And we agreed that while usernames and passwords have some problems, it's still we still use them because they're easy, they're low cost, they're not complex. Our end users understand. They've been trained how usernames and passwords work, and that passwords tend to expire, and how to reset their passwords. So there's very little training required for end users. So with that, we're going to switch over to some more kind of technical considerations with protection, specifically with your firewall. So remember, the firewall isn't the only thing that protects you from hackers, but it's certainly it's a necessary but not sufficient condition of security, if I were to be precise. So with a firewall, there's just two sides to a firewall. There's in and out. There's outside and inside, external and internal, whatever you want to call it. But for some reason with firewalls, we talk about ingress and egress. And ingress is just a fancy word for inbound. Egress is a fancy word for outbound. So there's ingress filtering, the packets that are coming from the cloud into your network, and egress filtering if you want to stop certain traffic that's originating on your LAN and going out to the cloud. So, for example, just think for a second. If you wanted to block Facebook for your employees, is that ingress filtering or egress filtering? Well, it's probably egress filtering is where you lock that down. Okay, next is how a firewall works is it's got a set of rules for how to determine if a packet, say there's certain packets all packets have headers, as we remember from the previous chapter. So certain bad packets, attack packets, have certain signatures. So there's strings of text that a firewall can look at. If it cracks open the packet to see what's inside, if there's something that matches up with a bad signature, it can block it. So the only thing that a firewall will ever block, or drop is the other, means the same thing, to drop or to block a packet, is if it's absolutely 100% certain that it's an attack packet, and it'll block it. The only time it ever blocks is if it's 100% sure. If it's not sure, maybe it's bad, maybe it's good, who's to really say, it's going to pass it. So that's the scary thing about firewalls. If it's not sure, it's going to go ahead and pass it. That's why you want to set up your firewalls as strictly as you can, and then kind of ease up over time, because firewalls tend to be pretty forgiving, depending on the make and model and the software and whatnot. So it's either going to block or pass, and if it blocks, it'll log it and hopefully let you know, or trigger some kind of alert for the network administrator. The firewall does this by through a process called SPI, Stateful Packet Inspection. Stateful Packet Inspection means it depends on what state the transmission is in, the conversation is in. So one state is when you first open up a new connection. Another state is when you're transmitting data, and another state is when you're closing the connection. So this is something the TCP handles for you with the SYN and the FIN and those segments that we're looking at in the previous chapter. So stateful packet inspection only happens at the beginning when you're opening up a new connection. So it doesn't make sense to have the firewall slowing things down by looking at every single packet that comes in. It's only going to look at that first one that comes in from a new connection from outside. This really speeds up the process, so that first packet, once it stamps an approval on it, it's going to pass everything else as long as that connection is open. So it does this on opening because the opening of a new connection is the riskiest stage of a connection. So this just makes sense. Another way the firewalls operate is with ACLs, access control lists. And actually ACL is a acronym that Cisco uses a lot on all of its gear. In fact, you can create ACLs on your router, on your switch, on any Cisco device. But it originated as an idea on firewalls to have a list of what's approved and what's not approved. So for example, if you don't want the firewall to waste its time doing stateful packet inspection for things that you know are allowed. So for example, if you want to allow email, and in fact, unfortunately there's no way around it, you just have to open up port 25 and allow email. So in this very, very simple ACL, and ACL usually has dozens, if not hundreds of lines in it. In this example, no matter where the email is going, we're going to allow that to come through. Well, that just makes sense. Anything that's going where the destination address is port 80, and port 80 is what? HTTP. That's exactly right. We're going to allow that as well. Now that's, of course, a great big hole, and a lot of bad traffic sneaks in port 80, but we still have to allow it, because if you block it, people aren't going to get anything done. So we're back to that trade-off between security and productivity. And then the last line, if the packet doesn't correspond to rule number 1, rule number 2, it goes to rule number 3. When in doubt, what? Deny. And so this is the ideal way to set up your ACL. This is the way that I was taught, that your firewall should deny all traffic and allow by exception. Let me repeat that. Deny all, allow by exception. The problem is a lot of people set up their firewalls the opposite way. They allow all and deny by exception. So let's think this through for a second. If you allow all and deny by exception, that means every time a new threat is discovered, you have to go in there and create another rule and block that port or block that range of addresses. For example, I got fed up one time and just blocked the entire Eastern Hemisphere because we were getting too much bad traffic and we had no need to communicate with anybody in the Far East, and so we just kind of blocked half the world. Now that's an ugly way to do it. I don't recommend doing it that way, but you can, because it's all based on IP address. But this is really the right way to do it. The default is everything's blocked unless you specifically identify a reason for that traffic to get into your network. That's the right way to do it. Now we're switching into cryptography as another piece of technology that helps us, another layer of security. So CIA is a very common acronym you're going to hear in network security. I've heard CIA referred to as an explanation of security broadly speaking, but the Pankow textbook uses it as the acronym to describe what cryptography does, that it ensures confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. CIA. So an encrypted message, if you kind of played around with Wireshark at all, if you tried to open up an encrypted message, so like HTTPS traffic, you can capture those packets, right? You see them, you can open them up, but if you look at the layer 5, the content of the message, it's going to be encrypted. It's just going to be garbage. It's a string of letters and numbers. It's not going to be meaningful. That's not to say that that information can't be cracked. So the way most people crack open encrypted passwords is if you, I can't believe I'm sharing this, but I'm going to share this. If you capture enough traffic and plug it into the right piece of software, given enough time and horsepower, it can go through and figure out what somebody's password is if you captured enough packets. But enough on that. So basically, an encrypted message is going to thwart. That's why we say a casual eavesdropper. It takes a little knowledge to figure out how to crack it. A symmetric key encryption is a single key used to encrypt and decrypt in both directions. The acronym to memorize here is AES. You don't have to remember that it stands for Advanced Encryption System, but this is the most popular encryption cipher that's used today. And most hardware and software platforms use some flavor of AES. Other cryptographic system standards, so SSL, TLS. TLS is a newer version of SSL, but we still tend to call it SSL just because that's what we do. And that has to do with the encryption that's going on with a web page. If you buy something off Amazon and it switches over to HTTPS mode, you see the little padlock icon in your browser to know that it's secure. That's an example of SSL encryption. IPsec encryption is something that you do over a VPN, which encrypts all traffic. So SSL traffic only encrypts web traffic. IPsec encrypts all traffic. So here on this slide, SSL is just within your browser. It's only a certain kind of traffic, browser to web server traffic. This is how you tell that it's encrypted. And it's pretty straightforward to implement. That's why so many people use it, because it's pretty easy. IPsec takes a little more know-how because you have to set up IPsec on firewalls at either end. So one version of a VPN tunnel, which we talk more about in a later chapter, VPN tunnels, a virtual private network tunnel. It allows you to do secure communication over the internet as if it were private, so it's virtually private. That's where the term comes from. IPsec is a protocol that you enable it on your firewall at your corporate office, and then you have to enable it on the other side too. Now maybe that's just simply on a mobile VPN client like a Cisco AnyConnect or something that uses IPsec. The other option is to turn it on at a remote branch office, and you're just leaving this VPN tunnel up all the time. And it's running because it's running IPsec, it has the ability to encrypt all traffic, not just web traffic. So that's it for the protect section. That was pretty